I am Jada Walker-Griggs. I'm the Program Manager Senior for Sustainability for the city, which I will say is less than 2.5 years in that position. But I'm happy to be here with you to talk to you about what the city has been doing for the last couple of years. So I see some familiar faces out here and several that I do not know, so I'm glad to be out here to let you know again what the city is doing. So Empower Lexington Plan. This is a plan for a resilient community. It is the sustainability plan for the city. In 2012, the city did put out their first Empower Lexington Plan, and actually it was more of a community effort. The stakeholders for the community were the ones that took the lead on Empower Lexington Plan, because it wasn't just a city plan, it's a community plan. And so that's what it still is and was meant to be. So stakeholders, about 75 stakeholders developed this plan over a 3-year period. It was supported by council in 2012. And you see there the focus was energy efficiency and the following what we call sectors at the time. And so I won't bother to read all of those, but you will see those. This plan was meant to be flexible, voluntary, and then to reduce energy usage at least 1% per year. So when I came on board a couple years ago, one of the first things I did was pull that plan, find it first of all, right? And then pull the plan off the shelf. And then I started looking through it, because in my mind, if you're over sustainability, the sustainability plan is the foundation for your work, right? And that's what it was always meant to be. I think when I started going to workshops and conferences, I was at plannings on the table, I would see someone in a virtual meeting. Oh, that person was on Empower Lexington. That person was on Empower Lexington. So I asked them, those that I saw at the time, told them what my vision was, and that was to update the plan. Asked them to participate as core team members because they went through it initially, and I thought it would be easier to get it off the ground running and get the updates taken care of. And there was not one person that said no. So that tells you that sustainability in the community is still very much in the forefront and important. And so what we did is came together with the core team, asked them to look at new sectors. You see it on there, they're different than what you saw on the other ones. So what I did is decided that Lexington should pursue, at least for cities, certification. And with that, we've aligned that with our sustainability plan. And so the sector chairs, which many of them were from the core team, got together, had meetings, and said, who's missing from our group? Let's pull this person and that person and this business and that business. And so word got around. And we have about 50 members that went through this process that committed their time for about 4 months to give me information for leads for cities. Also, a lot of them did narrative to help with the sustainability part, because in my mind, there's not just one thing. So there's a sustainability plan. And from that plan is, we need to update our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And you will hear from Abby on that here soon. And then from there, because we now know where we are, then we know where we need to go. And so we will also be doing a emissions reduction plan with measures that we can use and implement to help us get where we need to be. There are 2 new sectors. Some of the sectors moved around a bit, but there are 2 new that was not initially in the first one. That's water efficiency and then quality of life. Because although 12 years ago we really weren't talking about it, a couple years ago when I started this process, it was at the forefront. And so that includes our justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion. So speaking of Leads for Cities, which is leadership in energy and environmental design. And so that's done by the U.S. Green Building Council. And when you think of LEED, you think of green building, right? So this is a certification that they have. And I thought, okay, we need to do this. Louisville's done this. Cincinnati's done this. Lexington, the second largest municipality in the state of Kentucky, should have this. And so I started that process. I'm happy to say that we were selected as a cohort program. You see the other 12 cities there. And so not only are they a global leader in green buildings, the U.S. Green Building Council, their vision is that buildings and communities will regenerate and sustain the health and vitality of our life. It was also a peer-to-peer networking opportunities, technical assistance, access to significant information. And so I was very ambitious my first year. And I actually paused and said, do I have to try to do it all in 1 year? But we know the urgency of climate change, and we have to do everything we can with all the resources that we have, and that's what we're moving toward. One of the things in the Empire Lexington Plan initially in 2012 was solar. So, I am happy to say that we have partnered with the Kentucky Solar Energy Society for the past 2 years to provide a vetted process for our homeowners, or our residents really, in solar. And although our focus is residential, it is also open to small businesses, nonprofits, and places of worship. Council approved $1 million for the past 2 years for grants for low to moderate income households. How many of you in here that hasn't heard me or seen me has heard about Solarize Lexington? Okay, so I need you to spread the word if you would. We do have grant funding, as I mentioned, and I'll show you more about that on the next slide. We launched on March 12th, and enrollment will end on March 9th. I will say that up to 80% of the area median income, that is on our website. And so you don't have to guess if your home qualifies. If you would go to www.lexingtonky.gov/sustainability, and then you can click on the tile that says Solarize Lexington. And you can see, and it tells you exactly what to do if you feel like you meet the requirements for our grants. We do have some grant funding left. It is on first come, first served basis. So if you're interested, I recommend that you check that out after this session tonight. So here's some stats here from 2023 and 2024. 2023 being our first, it took off like wildfire. We had significant interest, and I would say this year I was excited, I was ready. I had a different shirt in my office because the TV media kept calling me, and I was like, do I have on the same shirt? So I thought, oh, that's not going to happen. And I didn't hear a thing. And so I was like, what's going on? We are being aggressive at getting the information out. And they're like, oh, it's just the second year. So let me tell you, they have been trickling in, but they are still coming. And we want more of that because we know how important our renewable energy is. There's a quote there from a grantee that I will actually take the time to read. I would like to thank you and everyone else involved with Solarize Lexington program. What a wonderful gift. The staff I worked with at the end were great. Everything they said would happen did and was very timely. The crew from Solar Energy Solutions were professional and very easy to work with. I am looking forward to getting my first electric bill. This program makes me proud of our great city. And so I did add solutions at the end of that because they said solar energy, but it's important to know the installer's name, and it is Solar Energy Solutions. They are the only installer we're using. We vetted every installer that sent in for our RFP, but they were the ones that were selected for Solarize Lexington. So, I said I stopped to think, am I trying to do everything in 1 year? So one of the things that I'm sure we're all aware of is the vast amount of federal funding for grants that came out, right, start in 2022. And so and I mentioned all the passionate people that we have in Lexington. I was amazed in a lot of ways, all the people that are very passionate about this. And so I would get emails from different sources, including internally from our other divisions. Do you know about this grant? Do you know about that grant? And here's a grant. This grant, through EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was a climate pollution reduction planning grant. So Lexington and Fayette County Metropolitan Statistical Area, MSA, received just under $1 million for planning grants to develop a priority and comprehensive climate action plan. If you look at those highlighted there, it represents the MSA for Lexington and Fayette County. Lexington is the largest municipality in this MSA. I will say that this grant was offered to states, $3 million for states, and then the MSAs up to $1 million for those that were in the top 67 by population. And so knowing that we were doing Empower Lexington, that we know implementation and measures need to come, we know it's going to be very costly, and trying to save government assets, I thought, I need to go for this implementation grant. Well, lo and behold, I didn't know that in order to get to the implementation, you were required to do this grant. So I had to slow down a lot of things to try to get this through. But the planning is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful pollutants. So the priority plan is a simplified greenhouse gas emissions. I will say that in the state of Kentucky, Bowling Green's MSA, Louisville and Jefferson County's MSA, and the Lexington, Fayette County MSAs are the three that are doing this grant. It was something that the state opted not to pursue. And so once we found that out, we had to go to work to get the money into the state. We do have our priority plan completed. It is on our website. I will say that we were basically running through this whole process. And I say we because I look over at Abby because she was there running with me. We and other great people on our team, and these, I will say that because we had to wait to see if we could get the funding, not certain I mentioned that I said the first 67 MSAs by population could automatically get it. Lexington was 107, so we were quite far from that line, which is why it was very important if the state had received it. But then we waited, but guess what? Our wait paid off, and we were able to get it. The proposal we put in was just under $1 million. And that leads to the comprehensive plan. I mentioned we're finished with the priority piece. That plan is on our website as well. We now are getting started for the comprehensive piece. And, I've heard, well, why are you doing all these plans? Why, but the thing is, you have to have a plan. As economic development, when someone is wanting to move into Lexington or this region, what do you have? What's your sustainability plan? What are your goals? How are you going to achieve this, right? And so you have to have a plan. So when they come here, we're ready. And so moving to the comprehensive part, we have to build on our simplified emissions inventory that was done in what we call the PCAP, which is a priority climate action plan. We have to quantify those reduction targets by sectors and do a benefits analysis. We also have to target what EPA defines as low-income disadvantaged communities. We're going to have extensive stakeholder engagement, which will start in Lexington probably the week of August the 20th. And so we want your input, and you will see more about that in the media in the next few weeks or so. let's see. And the other part of that is not only, the federal government wants to know, okay, we have this funding for you available, but can you find other funding to keep these, to help with implementation? And so we have to review those opportunities as well. I mentioned the implementation grant. So let me just say, we put in the application. We found out that we received the award in September. We did not receive the funding until November. And the priority climate action plan was due March 1st. So when I say we were running to get things done, we were. It felt that way. So then, in order to do the implementation grant, which was due April 1st, you had to get finished with that other piece. So we've been quite busy, and I will say, I'm happy to say that we were able to submit what we feel like was a great application. We will soon find out. We expect to this month in July if we receive that. Our ask was just under $50 million for this MSA. And of that, just over $27 million will stay in Lexington and Fayette County. So that's significant. The measures that we put in, I mentioned the priority plan, those measures came from that plan. They had to be ready and action ready to go. They had to be plans where you've tried it, we know it can be done, and you can use additional funding for that. So here are the 5 that we selected. And this is for the MSA. So tree canopy is one, Solarize Lexington program. And what we will do is those programs will also be, we will introduce those programs into the other communities as well, right? Not just here, but we will get a significant amount here in Lexington, which will also save our bottom line for our budget as well. So we're looking forward to hearing back about this grant. We put one in for LexTran, electrical bus charging canopy. So this will provide cover, weather protection for their electric fleet, some charging infrastructure, generator backup, and some recharging so they can recharge in the event that the power does go out. And then a regional EV study, that's something that's important. We know that where the EV stations are coming from the interstates and the parkways, and so now we get to have a plan that says, we've looked at this, here's our plan for EV study. And so that should put us ahead of the game in a lot of ways, or at least catch us up to where we need to be, right? Okay, so here's some program highlights. I've done several things, but those were the major things that we're doing. But I will just say again, reiterate that Solarize Lexington, we were given $1 million for grants for low to moderate income. And again, we still have some funding available. The Empire Lexington plan, a plan for a resilient community. We're updating that now, working really hard to be able to present that to council, or actually to the Environmental Quality and Public Works Committee, right when they come back from break on August the 20th. And we updated our inventory for 2021. We're doing a Leads for Cities certification. I expect to submit that for preliminary review by July the 19th. The climate action plans, the comprehensive plan will be finished next year. So by, I think, September the 1st, we'll need to present that to EPA. We have taken back in-house because you'll see there I have an environmental initiative specialist that, although I've done quite a bit of work since she came on board in December 2023, she has been able to take over the Green Check Sustainability Business Program. And we also, if anyone plays pickleball or knows anyone that plays pickleball, we've also are doing pickleball recycling. We started at Kirk Levington. And so that's just the highlights for our program. Just want you to know that we're working hard. You will have the opportunity to submit comments during our comprehensive plan that is coming up soon, and it will be significant throughout all counties and including here in Lexington. And that's all I have for the sustainability piece. Abby Terry is an engineer from our consulting firm, Tetra Tech, and she is going to break down our community-wide and maybe our municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory.
Thank you, Jada. It has truly been a pleasure working with you and your team at Environmental Services. Also want to thank Fayette Alliance for having us out today. Some of the things we've talked about this evening are near and dear to my heart. I'm originally from southeastern Kentucky, but eventually went on to UK and loved Lexington. So I'm with Tetra Tech here in town. This is the place I'm proud to call home as well. So if you hear me say we or our, it's because this is my home too. So there are three key takeaways from Lexington's 2021 community-wide and municipal greenhouse gas inventories. Number one, Lexington's per capita or per person emissions have declined approximately 26% since their initial greenhouse gas inventory. Number two, Lexington's energy emissions account for almost 70% of the inventory. And number three, LFUCG operations comprise less than 2% of the total. So the rest of the presentation will just kind of go into a little bit of detail of the inventory and methodologies. And this report is posted on Jada's website if I don't get to get in as much depth as I would like on some of the slides. Okay, so as Jada mentioned, the original Empower Lexington plan was developed from 2009 to 2012, and that plan contained Lexington's first greenhouse gas inventory. That was completed for calendar year 2007. The city updated that inventory several times, but prior to this inventory, the last inventory was completed in calendar year 2013. So it was really important to the Empower Lexington Committee to have an up-to-date current inventory to include in the Empower Lexington plan. Okay, so let's cover some basics before we get into the results here. So what is a greenhouse gas? Well, they trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, and some of this action is necessary for Earth to be livable. The increased concentration of these gases is typically what we think of when we think of climate change, which, as we know, can result in shifts in weather patterns, sea level rise, and other environmental impacts. And efforts to mitigate climate change often focus on the reduction of these greenhouse gases. Okay, so we know what a greenhouse gas is. Let's talk real quick about what a greenhouse gas inventory is. The key takeaway here is that it's a systematic and comprehensive accounting of greenhouse gas emissions for a specific geographic area, sector, or entity. And governments and businesses conduct greenhouse gas inventories to assess their contribution to climate change, set emission reduction targets, and track progress in mitigating climate impacts. Okay, just a few more definitions to cover here. So first we have global warming potential, and it simply tells you how potent a greenhouse gas is in relation to carbon dioxide. So if carbon dioxide has a global warming potential of 1, and another greenhouse gas has a global warming potential of 28, it has 28 times the effect of carbon dioxide over the same period. Next up, we have metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, or metric tons of CO2e, and this is the language in which we measure greenhouse gases. So it allows us to aggregate different gases into a single total. Then we have scopes and sectors and subsectors, and these are just different ways we classify or categorize emissions based on where they're occurring geographically or which industry, and we'll break down scopes here in a few slides because that's an important one to understand. And then finally, we have sources, which are just that. They're the individual activities actually generating the emissions. Okay, so with all that in mind, we're able to talk about how emissions are calculated, and it's really as simple as activity data, such as kilowatt hours of electricity usage, times an emission factor, which is a conversion factor that tells us how much greenhouse gas per unit of activity is generated, times that global warming potential to get our final quantity in metric tons of CO2e. Okay, we're almost there. So let's talk about the first greenhouse gas inventory real quick. At the time, there was a popular software called Clean Air and Climate Protection Software, and that was what was used for this inventory. It included Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions and totaled 6,777,136 metric tons of CO2e. And we always like to normalize those totals according to population, GDP, and a few other metrics. So when you normalize that total with the population at the time, that came out to about 23.4 metric tons of CO2e generated generated per person. In that original inventory, LFUCG operations totaled approximately 2%, so we were still pretty on par with that in 2021. There's a graph there if you are interested in the breakdown of that inventory, and there's actually an entire section on it in the Empower Lexington plan. So if you're interested in more detail on that, look that up this evening before you go to bed. Okay, so for this inventory, we use the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Inventories, or you'll hear it called the GPC. It's a comprehensive, globally recognized protocol that really hopes to allow cities to aggregate inventories across the nation. It includes the 7 major greenhouse gases from the Kyoto Protocol and includes scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So now I'm going to attempt to break that down. So this figure, let's pretend Lexington or Fayette County is the green box. So scope 1 emissions are emissions that occur in Fayette County. Scope 2 emissions are strictly related to electricity consumption. It's really difficult to prove that electricity generated in your community is used in your community, so this is how the protocol attempts to deal with that. Scope 3 emissions are emissions that occur outside of your boundary or outside of Lexington as a result of activities or behaviors inside the boundary. So for example, there are no active landfills in Fayette County. All of our waste goes outside the county. We still account for those emissions within the Scope 3 category. So just a little bit more about the boundary. It's very important in your report that you're transparent about what the boundary of your inventory is, and it was really easy for us since the Lexington-Fayette County boundary is synonymous. If you're trying to parse out something like Cincinnati proper from Cincinnati, it can get sticky. So in our case, we used Fayette County as the boundary, and then activities and sources attributed to LFUCG operations were pulled out as a subset. So that way we could see directly what LFUCG was responsible for. Okay, so the moment we've all been waiting for. Here are the results, and there's a lot of data on this slide. Again, if you really want to dig into it, the report's available on the website for your viewing pleasure, but I'll just reiterate the 3 key takeaways. Our per capita or per person emissions have declined almost 26% since 2007, and I'll speak to a couple potential reasons for that here briefly. Number 2, energy emissions account for 70%, that huge chunk of the pie of the inventory. And number 3, LFUCG operations only contribute about 2% to the inventory. So this slide is the results of the LFUCG operations inventory, and again, the key takeaway here is that the vast majority of emissions are from electricity and natural gas usage. Okay, so now I'm going to briefly touch on the highlights of each sector. So first up, we have stationary energy, and you can see all the things that we looked at listed here on the screen, but by and large, the largest contributors were electricity and natural gas usage. We did look at consumption broken out into residential, commercial, and industrial subsectors, and you can see how those break out here on the graphs on the right-hand side of the screen. The commercial subsector was responsible for the largest percentage of natural gas and electricity usage. So, as promised, one of the potential reasons for the reduction, back in 2007, coal accounted for almost 93% of Kentucky's electricity. In 2021, it was down to 68%. So that results in a lower emission factor, which, as we talked about, is that intensity multiplier that we use to calculate the emissions. Next is transportation. So the sources included in this sector are listed there on the screen, but the biggest contributor is, of course, on-road transportation. So these emissions are calculated using total vehicle miles traveled, vehicle types, and fuel types. We did see a 1% reduction in vehicle miles traveled since the original inventory, even though population has increased. But what was going on around that time? Everyone was staying at home. So there's probably some lingering effects from the COVID-19 pandemic at play in this sector. Moving on to waste. So I've already mentioned there's no active landfills in Fayette County. All municipal solid waste, or MSW, is hauled outside of the county. So these emissions are classified as Scope 3, or indirect emissions. And then when looking at the total waste generated in 2021 and the population, it came out to about 0.91 metric tons of waste generated per person. This is just slightly higher than what the EPA shows as the current national average, which is 0.81 metric tons per person. And while collecting all this data, we did also look at the waste streams that were diverted. You can see those at the bottom there. And while they don't result in a direct subtraction or credit to emissions, these are materials that would have otherwise been in the landfill producing emissions. Okay, so the final two sectors are only applicable to the community-wide inventory. First up, we have industrial products and product use, or IPPU. And while it can be said that Lexington does have some industry, the protocol, the GPC, is very prescriptive about what it considers industry. And these are processes that inherently generate greenhouse gases. So those are listed there on the screen. It's the mineral, chemical, and metal industries, non-energy products from fuels and solvent use, the electronics industry, and the substitution of fluorinated substances for ozone-depleting substances. Finally, we have the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. This accounted for less than 1% of the inventory, and the largest contributor was enteric fermentation, which is related to the digestive process of livestock. This was also a sector where we were able to take away some emissions. Lexington had conducted an urban tree canopy assessment in 2022. So we were able to use that to estimate the carbon sequestration that the city was getting from the tree canopy, and that came out to about 42,339 metric tons of CO2e. Once we had our results, we also did a little bit of trend analysis, and the three graphs on the screen show Lexington's total greenhouse gas emissions, emissions per capita, and emissions per gross domestic product, or GDP, over time. And we do see a decrease across all three metrics. Even though GDP has increased, emissions per GDP have decreased. And this generally indicates a positive trend in terms of sustainability and decoupling emissions from economic growth. We did see earlier that electricity was one of the major components of the LFUCG operations inventory. The Lexington Division of Environmental Services tracks electricity and natural gas usage, so we were able to take a look at the top 10 electricity users, shown here on the screen. The West Hickman and Town Branch wastewater treatment plants use the most electricity by far, but this is typical with the processes that they use to treat the water and wastewater, with the detention center coming in third, but still just half as much usage as the next highest. Once we knew where Lexington stood, we were also able to do a little bit of comparison to our peers, and while our per capita emissions were generally lower, Lexington has committed to net zero emissions by 2050, so there's still a lot of work to be done. Finally, we were able to forecast emissions for 2025, 2030, and 2050. And these forecasts are what is known as business as usual forecasts. So this is assuming that there's no major changes in operations or emission factors, but we know that this is not usually what happens in reality. However, they are good benchmarking tools to measure the effectiveness of emissions reduction measures, and they will be very important as we strive to meet our net zero goal by 2050.